Sup guys? In this video, I'll be going over the new event content, this time starring Guam and Laffy too. As usual, I won't be reading the skills in detail, but rather just pointing out the important parts and giving my own opinion. The link to the data mine itself will be in the description. Just a quick heads up, I haven't been as active as usual since completing chapter 15, so I might make more mistakes than usual in this video, but please bear with me. Without further ado, let's get into it. First up is Guam. Being a large cruiser, she's inherently very tanky just by virtue of her stats alone. What sets her apart from the other large cruisers though is that her anti-air stat is very high, so she also takes much less damage from aviation damage compared to the other large cruisers. Actually, she also has an additional 20% aviation damage resist, so she probably just takes no damage from planes at all, making her the tankiest large cruiser, and by extension, the tankiest ship in the game for soaking up aviation damage. In terms of her actual anti-air performance though, despite having 2 anti-air guns, it doesn't look to be on the same level as Cheshire or Shimanto because of the lower anti-air efficiency, but still very high. Aside from her AA, her skill effects are quite basic. She has a small shield which will add up to about 10% of her HP every minute, which will scale better than a typical evasion or damage reduction skill as the battle duration drags on. Let's say she's in combat for 10 minutes, then the skill will proc about 100 times and it will effectively double her EHP. This is going to be especially helpful in mob fleets where you need to do a ton of consecutive battles, so the total battle time ramps up. But obviously, outside of pretty specific scenarios, you're not going to be getting 100 procs out of a skill. But I think like 50 or more procs is pretty realistic for any campaign stage or challenge mode hard stage. Even in a single minute long battle though, her EHP is still very high, almost reaching the same level as Aegir and Brest, and that's if we're not considering aviation damage. In terms of damage, she doesn't really have any buffs for herself, but her skill 3 Barrage in particular has extremely high base damage, so much so that I think she'll overtake Kronstadt as the highest damage large cruiser in the game. Her armor break effect is negligible and nice to have if you can put a battleship in the relevant position, but not something to build your fleet around. In totality, with her high damage, bulkiness, and total disregard for incoming aviation damage, she will no doubt be a premier option for many situations, and in particular, Chapter 15. Next up is Laffy 2. She looks quite competent in everything you want from a destroyer, having pretty good firepower and torpedo damage, as well as being very tanky and having decent anti-air and anti-submarine. Comparing her to another generalist destroyer who's been around for quite a long time, Yudachi, Laffy seems to be at least tankier with better anti-air, and her damage could be potentially higher as well depending on the performance of her bunny strikers. One particular thing that I noticed is that her bunny strikers scale with her torpedo stat and have torpedo-like mods, so perhaps they will also ignore shields like torpedoes, although it doesn't say so in the data mine, so we'll have to see. The survivability of the strikers is questionable, with only 1000 HP and half of her own evasion, and also no auxiliaries to boost it further. Despite the base damage being quite low, since they scale with torpedoes and she's very bulky, you'll be able to boost their damage using Oxytorps. She also has a zombie type skill, and since she's USS, she can use the Elite Damage Control Ox, so she might even see usage in PvP, but I am by no means an expert in that aspect of the game. Aside from her own performance, she also has buffs that help USS carriers maintain concealment, which could be more of a difference maker than just her own damage alone. Since USS carrier fleets have a ton of flat damage buffs, this effect could potentially be even more valuable than air raid assist in certain fleets. And that's pretty much everything for Laffy. Next up is Constellation. Despite being a new ship, her skill descriptions are very short and concise for a change, which is perfectly fine to me. As a battleship with a guaranteed barrage and some damage buffs, I compared her kit to Owari, and the numbers do seem a little bit worse than Owari's. She is likely better than Georgia though, which believe it or not is all it takes to make her the second best USS battleship after New Jersey. Next up is Flasher. She has a relatively reliable slow and also applies a debuff similar to U-47s on the enemies with her torps. From the wording here, I think only the slow has a cooldown of 10 seconds, while the damage debuff can be refreshed at a 50% chance per hit. The slow she applies will of course help everyone, especially herself and U47 to chain consecutive torps and keep their debuffs applied. In addition, she also has buffs for Gato class submarines, which include Albacore and Kavala, but not Archerfish. Although she gives herself the buffs too, so you don't really have to sortie her with the Gato class subs just to maximize her own damage. I do think that her damage should be at least good enough to make her competitive with the other meta submarines, and the bonus utility of the slow will likely make her one of the best subs in the game. And one last thing, I don't think she has enough oxygen and reload to skimp out on using Snorkel when using bitters, so do keep that in mind when you're gearing her. Moving on, there isn't much to say about the purples gameplay-wise, so I'll move on to the new equipment. First up is the anti-submarine plane. It's an SSR, so as expected, it's a slight upgrade over the existing purple ones. No reason not to pick it up. And then we have the Rainbow Large Cruiser Gun. Normally, you would expect large cruiser guns to have lower DPS than heavy cruiser guns, since large cruiser guns arc over shields, have AoE, and large cruisers themselves have higher stats, but not this one. I plugged the numbers into a spreadsheet here just for comparison's sake, because it's not up on the wiki yet. Hopefully I didn't make a mistake, but it looks like it is an upgrade over Cron Gun in pretty much every aspect aside from a slightly smaller AoE. But I don't think the difference there will be enough to make the Cron Gun better for any scenario. Comparing it to the Rainbow Heavy Cruiser Guns, it even has competitive or higher straight up DPS in the relevant armor types, which is pretty ridiculous when accounting for the extra advantages mentioned earlier. As the owner of not 1, not 2, but 3 gold plus 13 AP large cruiser guns, I have mixed feelings about this. But fortunately, I do have enough plates to upgrade it to plus 13, so I'm not too upset over it. Anyways, that's pretty much going to be it for this update. I hope you found the video informative. Good luck on your pulls, and see you in the next one.